Forge, NeoForge, Fabric, and Quilt. 4 names with one single question. Which one of these should we choose as mod developers in 2025? Hello everyone, this is Ali Reza. Welcome to the Mentor Code Lab. Previous year, I had visited these 4 different names and talked about them in a single video. However, there are some things that changed regarding one of these, and I thought that, you know what, it's nice to have a new video talking about them, comparing them to each other, especially now that we want to start the new era video series, and now that 1.21.11 came out, and NeoForge had a whole year to expand and get separated from Forge. So in this video, we will compare them to each other and answer one single question. As a mod developer, which one of them are the better one to start your projects and expand your mod from scratch? Now, the easiest one to answer is Quilt. In my opinion, Quilt is always a no-go unless something drastically changes. The way Quilt started was that the very first year of Fabric being developed, some people were not happy with how Fabric was working, and they made the decision that, you know what, we can do better, and they forked themselves from Fabric. They started Quilt. Now, if we go down and read their homepage, there are lots of advertising text there. But in reality, when you read those texts, you see that they say one single thing over and over. This feature is work in progress. It's not finished. It's not ready. That feature is work in progress. It's not ready. If I want to wrap things up about Quilt, year after year, over 5 years now, it's still in their progress and it's not finished and it's not ready to be used in a serious mod development environment. In my opinion, Quilt is actually one of those projects that had started because of a potentially high energy in some programmers, but that energy is gone. And in my opinion, there is no way that Quilt can compete with other ones on the left-hand side, namely Fabric and NeoForge. Let's talk about Forge. Now, Forge is the oldest mod developer out there. Now, there are some things that I don't like about Forge. The biggest one is the head developer, Sir Lex Manus. That's a drama for another time. I'm not going to talk about it today. But the thing is that, as you see, it's still being published. So even after the fork and the NeoForge team separating from Forge, they are still working and updating. However, in my opinion, before Fabric, when Forge was the only option we had, well, we didn't have any other alternative, so we had to work with Forge. But these days, there are things that I don't like about Forge, and I will talk about it in a few minutes later in this video. And because of that, I really think Forge is not a good option anymore. It becomes more obvious when we talk about NeoForge and Fabric and compare them to each other. So stay tuned to the end of the video because there are lots of things that I want to cover. We have a fork that happened from Forge. Basically, around a year and a half ago, the main development, active programming team of Forge separated from project and started their own project called NeoForge. At the time, I thought to myself that, you know what, maybe NeoForge will fix many things that was wrong around Forge, and it will become a very powerful mod loader so that we can use it from that point forward. However, it didn't happen. Honestly, the way I see it, the Forge and NeoForge developers are consistent on the previous stepping stone of their theory and the concept that they accepted as the base stone and the foundation of their structure as API. Now, what do I mean by that? Although NeoForge had to change lots of sections of the code because Forge had copyright issues on there and there was legal problems there. However, NeoForge didn't fundamentally change the way Forge was behaving. If you ever open the Minecraft source in a Forge development environment, I'm not talking about a mod development environment. No, you can download Forge or NeoForge source code, open it as a project, and look at the Minecraft vanilla source code. At that point, you see something really interesting. They hook a lot into vanilla code. They inject tons of code into vanilla. This is the foundation and their policy for their mod loader. At any time, if they need something to be changed, let's do it. We add our code, inject it into vanilla, and fix some things or handle some things ourselves as the mod loader. Now, I don't like this foundational concept because, in my opinion, vanilla code should be untouched by a mod loader. The only places that a mod loader is allowed to interact with vanilla is to inject my code as a mod into the vanilla code and let the vanilla code understand that, hey, I'm adding, for example, a listener to an event, or I don't know, maybe an item to the game, or things like that. The more this mod loader tries to tweak vanilla code and hooks himself into different places in vanilla code, the more problematic that mod loader will become in a long run. Yes, it can become more powerful because, let's face it, it's giving us more flexibility, but at the same time, it's adding to the complexity of the vanilla code and interaction between mods and vanilla code. Because of that, you would see that Forge and NeoForge really are slow in publishing their mod loader when a new version of Minecraft comes out. Now, I will come back to NeoForge in a few minutes later again, but let's talk about Fabric. Fabric is fundamentally different from Forge and NeoForge. They try to not tweak vanilla code as much as possible, but at the same time, they add their own compatibility API around vanilla. And because of that, Fabric most of the time has a faster life cycle for updates, easier update time, less problems during updates, and less conflict with vanilla. At the same time, when it comes to advanced programming concepts like mixin, Fabric is much more user-friendly compared to Forge and NeoForge because they don't inject lots of code into vanilla. They keep vanilla untouched as much as possible. And because of that, when they open the door to mixin, there are less conflicts between mod developers and the mod loader itself. Until now, we established the fact that the right-hand side, Forge and Quilt, are almost dead. Although Forge is updating, but in my opinion, the core development team now are developing NeoForge, so why should I continue using Forge? Okay, so the remaining two mod loaders, NeoForge and Fabric. If I want to compare them on a technical aspect, aside from injecting lots of code into vanilla, NeoForge has one single gain against Fabric, and that is when it comes to events and event system. Forge, and by extent NeoForge, has much more event callbacks that you can hook into on many different points during a game life cycle. Compared to that, Fabric has less number of events. Don't get me wrong, there are still tons of events out there that you can use in Fabric, but compared to NeoForge, NeoForge has way more events. On the other hand, Fabric is opening the door to using mixin. And when you learn using mixin, you can inject your own code into vanilla, of course, with a little bit of careful thought process. And by doing that, you can create your own custom event really easily. On the other hand, on NeoForge, we still can use mixin. It's not as friendly as Fabric. And because of that, if you want to create your own custom event in NeoForge, you have a harder time. Arguably, you have enough events in NeoForge that you don't need to create your own event. Personally, I prefer to start smaller and inject anything new only and only if I need to. Let's give you an example. This is a theoretical example, so Don't sue me on the numbers, but let's say that NeoForge has, for example, 200 number of events and Fabric has only 80. If we compare these two at runtime, obviously Fabric will progress forward faster each frame of the game and in each tick. It will behave faster because it has to handle only 80 events per tick. In comparison, NeoForge is much slower because each tick it has to progress and process 200 different events being fired, even if there is no listener to that event. So firing that event will do absolutely nothing. But guess what? Mod loader is not aware of the fact, so it has to fire that event and add this boilerplate headache to the game each tick to handle events. When you start smaller, like Fabric, if you need a certain thing happen in certain point in the gameplay, yes, as a mod developer, you can add your own event into the game and your own listener will listen to that event. Basically, now you have the minimum possible boilerplate code per tick or frame in the game. There is another technical aspect of comparing these two mod loaders, and it comes to some API possibilities that each mod loader is adding to vanilla. Let's face it, both of them has to provide a way for you to inject your items or blocks or block entities or GUI into the game. So in that regard, both of them are doing the same thing in different way. In my opinion, Fabric's API is easier for beginners. Forge's API and NeoForge's API is a little bit more advanced and not as user-friendly as Fabric, especially if you are new to modding. Aside from this aspect of mod loaders, there are some API calls that you can use and add things into the game when vanilla is not producing the functionality. For example, energy system. For example, fluid system. For example, transferring things around the game, not using hoppers, but things like pipes or conduits or anything like that. Basically, a transfer API, an energy API, and a fluid API. Forge, and by extent NeoForge, is producing something that is called capability. Basically, capabilities is an interface that will inject some code into the game, and by using capability interface, you are defining a new type of capability for a block entity, for example. Now, this capability can become inventory, or can become fluid storage, or can become energy storage or energy and fluid provider. They combined all of these different technical aspects under one single interface called capability. And because of that, capability became a very complex thing to learn, and learning how to use capabilities is a little bit of confusing headache for a beginner. Don't get me wrong, it's a very powerful system. On the other hand, Fabric added the fluid system inside Fabric API, and keep in mind, Fabric API is not Fabric Loader. It's a separate mod that adds boilerplate API as a wrapper around vanilla and the mod loader itself. A much better design compared to NeoForge that injects tons of things into vanilla code as a loader. Now, Fabric API, as I said, develops an API to generate your custom fluid type and add a fluid container into some blocks or even transfer fluid around. But they don't produce any energy API for you. On the other hand, another team that developed their own custom mod are producing energy API. And who knows, maybe later down the road, few years later, you will see that the energy API will become part of the Fabric API. But so far, it didn't happen. And the team who started energy API is continuing his job, and Fabric API is respecting their job and the community is using the Energy API separated from Fabric API. I don't want to dive into the technical aspect of these things, but if I want to briefly tell you an explanation, both Fabric and NeoForge let you register a new type of fluid or an energy, any type of energy, and they let you transfer things around. And recently, when I looked at Neo4j's blog posts, we see that at some point they are talking about transfer rework. I will go back to the blog post regarding Neo4j in a few minutes, but when I looked at the transfer rework, I was confused. I came face to face with the question, was this the main code inside Forge that is now being forked in Neo4j, and now they are working on it to rewrite some things? And Fabric got the idea from these guys and implemented his own transfer API? Or was it reversed and Fabric was the first one who added a transfer API, and now Neo4j is trying to mimic Fabric? Honestly, I didn't sit back to read and look at the history and try to figure this question out, because guess what? It won't help anyone even if you know the answer. It's the story of egg and a chicken. What is important is to understand that both Fabric and Neo4j have transfer API, and this transfer API is really looking like each other. The more they go forward, the more similar their behavior will become. So regarding the transferring things around or generating your fluid or energy, in my opinion, the generation and usage is easier in Fabric because capability by default is complex, but on the other hand, capability is much more powerful compared to the API that Fabric is providing, although there are some ways to work around it and make the API calls in Fabric as powerful as needed. There is another aspect that you should be aware of, and that is being pushed based against being pull based. Although we will talk about it in the mod series, sufficient to say that both Fabric Loader and Neo4j Loader has a pushed base API when it comes to transferring things around. There is no pull-based system in any one of those two. Now let's focus and talk about Neo4j alone. If I look at the blog posts for Neo4j, we see that after the talking about the drama and when they were forking out, there are two different things, actually three different things that shine in these blog posts in 3 pages. I'm not gonna open every one of them. I'm just gonna talk about them. The first one is that they started rewriting their own capability system. Guess what? That was the heart functionality of item, energy, and fluid stuff that we talked right now. So they had to rewrite it at some sections because those sections had copyright issues compared to Forge. And it took long enough to write that. However, it became stable. Then they started working on their networking. Again, another rewrite of a core fundamental section of the loader. And around 6 months later, or actually recently, I think it's 8 months gap between these rewriting code, we see this. The transfer is being reworked now by Technician. Technician is a very powerful programmer who knows what he's doing, an old member of the community, and now it looks like he's one of the core developers on the Neo4j. Funny enough, he is developing his mod both on Neo4j and Fabric, and he is very well familiar with internals of Fabric mod loader and Fabric API, and now he's working on Neo4j. So I assume that the more we go forward, the more similar API calls and concepts we will see in both Neo4j and Fabric. Now here's the thought process that I had when I was looking through these blog posts. It looks like Neo4j is still not out of the wood. And if you look, it's still in beta versions. There is no final version out there related to Neo4j. However, during the last year and a half, they came a long way and changed three different fundamental aspects of their mod loaders: the capabilities, the networking, and now the transferring API. However, the problem is that fundamentally their base infrastructural code is still following the same concepts of Forge. And because of that, I really think that in a long run, they still have a more complex code base to work with. In contrast with NeoForge, we have Fabric. Now, Fabric is a very light-weighted mod loader compared to Forge and NeoForge, much more user-friendly for a new developer. And in my opinion, opening the door to Mixin makes it a more powerful API for a mod developer that is planning for a long road ahead of himself for the future of his mod. At the end, there is something else that I need to talk about, and that is what people had chosen as mod developers. If you look into CurseForge and Modrinth, you see that there are tons of mods out there that are using NeoForge and Forge and doing lots of fancy stuff. But in comparison to them, there are more mods on Fabric, and the mods on Fabric are really more fundamentally powerful compared to Forge. Yes, we have Create as a mod on Forge and NeoForge that is adding lots of machines and blocks and multi-block structures in the game that has animation, that has functionality, and as a player you will be mesmerized by the beauty of Create. However, when you look at Fabric, you will see that you have lots of optimization mods that are optimizing the core functionality of vanilla, for example, on culling, on the rendering, on the lighting engine, and many more different things, and make the game much faster, much more optimized. And after that, you will see enough mods out there for players to even not look into Create anymore. However, there is one thing that I should mention. Compared to Forge and NeoForge, we have less tech mods on Fabric. Back in old days, when Forge was the only mod loader, the pioneer developers of mods were more interested into tech mods. They liked to have easier time duplicating their ores or things like that. And knowing that Eloram was one of the core developers of the very first mod loader in history, and Eloram had this mod called the Red Power that was all about redstone and gates and things like that. So you would imagine that naturally the very first mods that came out for Minecraft using a mod loader were tech mods, and they were using a mod loader concept that later became Forge. Compared to that, when Fabric came out, people were playing magic mods more because they were tired of playing tech mods for years. And because of this shift in interest between players, Fabric mod developers focused more on magical and non-tech mods more. This doesn't mean that Fabric is not powerful. If you look at modern industrialization, you would see a very powerful tech mod that is working on Fabric, written by Technician, the same mod developer that is now working on NeoForge. In other words, he really showcases a very powerful tech mod using Fabric. So you can think that Fabric has enough powerful infrastructure to handle optimization mods, technical mods, magical mods, or any other mod that you need to write. Now, if I have to choose between Fabric and NeoForge as a new programmer, my choice would be Fabric, because as I said, Forge by default is more complex and the API calls are more complex, but Fabric is easier to understand and easier to learn for a beginner, and at the same time more powerful when you go on advanced topics like Mixin, your custom event system, or any other system that you want to inject into vanilla. Because of that, I think from this moment forward until a further notice, we will continue working with Fabric in our channel. I may start NeoForge in future. only and only if I see that first, it's not a beta mod loader anymore, and second, I got my Fabric series into a point that I can call it beyond intermediate steps into advanced mod development concepts, and at that time, I may start working on basics of NeoForge. So as a mod developer, wrapping things up, my choice is still Fabric in 2025. Have fun, everyone. Bye.